I'm Natalie Reynolds, 32, and I never thought I'd measure my worth by a car. Yet here I am, gripping the steering wheel of my new Porsche 911 as I drive through my childhood neighborhood. The same parents who couldn't be bothered to attend my wedding, two empty seats in the front row that still haunt my wedding photos, are about to suddenly remember I exist. I can already imagine their expressions shifting from dismissal to dollar signs. As I pull into their driveway, I see their faces in the window, shock transforming into recognition. Do I forgive or confront? The moment of truth has arrived. Before I tell you how my parents only saw my value when it came with a price tag, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like your worth to someone depended on what you could give them. Drop a like if you believe true family sees your value beyond material success. Now, let's rewind to where this story really begins. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial on Maple Street had manicured lawns, seasonal wreaths on the front door, and a family that appeared wholesome and loving during neighborhood barbecues. But appearances were everything to Brian and Karen Reynolds, my parents. From my earliest memories, I understood that love in our household came with conditions. Straight A's on my report card meant warm smiles and public praise. Anything less resulted in cold shoulders and whispered comparisons to more successful children. The Hendersons' daughter got into the advanced math program, my mother would say over dinner, her voice dripping with disappointment when I brought home a B+ in algebra. When I won the regional science fair in 6th grade, my father proudly displayed my trophy in the living room where visitors could see it. But when I struggled with soccer and wanted to quit, he lectured me about commitment and not being a quitter. Never mind that I was miserable and had twisted my ankle twice. It wasn't about my happiness. It was about how it would look if a Reynolds child gave up. My brother Ryan, 4 years younger, somehow escaped these expectations. While I was held to impossibly high standards, Ryan's mediocre grades and behavioral problems were dismissed as boys being boys, or he'll grow out of it. When he was caught shoplifting at 14, my parents hushed it up and blamed peer pressure. When I missed curfew once because I was studying late at the library, I was grounded for 2 weeks. The disparate treatment was obvious, but any attempt to point it out was labeled as jealousy or sibling rivalry. I learned early to keep my observations to myself and focus on achievement as the only reliable way to gain parental approval. My interest in computers began in middle school when I taught myself basic coding. Rather than encouraging this passion, my parents viewed it as playing around on the computer and frequently limited my screen time so I could focus on more appropriate activities like debate club and piano lessons, things that looked good on college applications. Computers are for boys, my mother remarked, when I tried to explain my interest in programming. You should focus on something that will help you meet the right kind of people. By right kind, she meant wealthy, and connected the type of people she hoped I would eventually marry. Despite their discouragement, I continued teaching myself coding in secret, often staying up late after my parents thought I was asleep. Mr. Phillips, my high school computer science teacher, recognized my talent and gave me additional resources and encouragement. For the first time, I felt truly seen for who I was, not who someone wanted me to be. Senior year of high school brought the first major collision between my parents' expectations and my own aspirations. I had been accepted to both Princeton, my parents' dream, and the University of Illinois with a full scholarship for computer science, my dream. The choice seemed obvious to me. UIUC had one of the best computer science programs in the country, and I could graduate debt-free. When I announced my decision at dinner, my mother set down her fork with a clatter. "You're turning down Princeton? After all our hard work to build the right connections and credentials? Mom, UIUC has an amazing computer science program, and I won't have any student loans." "Computer science?" My father's voice rose in disbelief. "That's your reason for throwing away an Ivy League opportunity? You can study whatever you want after you get the Princeton pedigree. It's not throwing anything away. It's choosing the best path for my future." The argument escalated until my father delivered the crushing blow. If you're determined to make this mistake, you'll do it without our financial support. We've saved for Princeton, not for this. That night, I discovered the first major betrayal my parents had indeed saved for my education. They had the means to help me, regardless of which school I chose, but they were withholding support as punishment for not following their life plan for me. Meanwhile, they had already started talking about sending Ryan to an expensive private high school despite his mediocre grades. The pain of this realization was profound, but it also crystallized something in me. If my parents' love and support were conditional on me living the life they envisioned rather than my own, then perhaps I needed to build a life independent of their approval altogether. I accepted the UIUC scholarship and spent that summer working 2 jobs to save for expenses the scholarship wouldn't cover. My parents' attitude oscillated between cold disappointment and performative support when others were watching. On move-in day, they drove me to campus in silence, helped unload my belongings with mechanical efficiency, and left with barely a goodbye. Standing in my half-unpacked dorm room, I made a promise to myself. I would succeed not to win their approval, but to prove to myself that I could thrive without it. It was the first day of my independent life, and despite the hurt, it felt like freedom. College became my liberation. Without my parents' constant judgment clouding my perspective, I flourished both academically and socially. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus IT help desk and waited tables on weekends, leaving little time for homesickness or regret about my decision. My first semester grades a perfect 4 brought a brief, stilted call from my father. "Well, I guess that school isn't completely without merit," he conceded, as close to approval as I was likely to get. I thanked him politely and quickly changed the subject, already learning that seeking their validation was a losing proposition. The turning point came during my sophomore year when I took an advanced algorithms class with Professor Diane Wilson. Unlike other professors who seemed impressed but distant, Dr. Wilson took a personal interest in my work. After I submitted a particularly innovative project, she invited me to her office hours. "You have a natural talent for this field, Natalie," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But more importantly, you have the drive and work ethic to develop that talent. Have you considered research opportunities?" Under her mentorship, I began working on research projects that eventually led to my first published paper as an undergraduate. When I nervously mentioned my strained relationship with my parents, Dr. Wilson shared her own experiences with family expectations. "Family should lift you up, not box you in," she told me. "Sometimes the people who should support us the most are the least equipped to do so. It's not your job to shrink yourself to make them comfortable." Dr. Wilson became the supportive adult figure I had always craved. She attended my research presentations, recommended books beyond the curriculum, and occasionally invited me to dinner with her family on holidays when returning home felt too painful. For the first time, I saw what unconditional support looked like. The summer before my senior year, I landed a prestigious internship at Tech Future, a growing startup in San Francisco. The experience was transformative suddenly. I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who valued innovation over pedigree, and who judged work on its merits rather than its packaging. My supervisor, Layla, became another important mentor. When I confessed my insecurities about coming from a less prestigious university than some of my fellow interns, she laughed. "In this industry, it's what you can build that matters, not where you learn to build it. And Natalie, you can build things most Stanford grads can only dream about." That validation based on genuine accomplishment rather than fulfilling someone else's expectations was intoxicating. When the internship ended with a job offer for after graduation, accepting felt like another step toward a self-determined life. My parents' reaction to the internship's success marked another pivotal moment in our relationship. Suddenly, I was invited home for Christmas, the first such invitation since I'd left for college. The reason became clear when I overheard my mother on the phone with her friend Judith. "Yes, Natalie's doing very well. Her internship was with one of those important tech companies in Silicon Valley. Very selective program. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. But it wasn't pride in me, it was pride in how my accomplishments reflected on her. Later that same evening, when no one was around, I heard her true feelings. Of course, it's not what we had hoped for her. All that education just to type on computers all day. But at least the money is decent, and she might meet some successful men in that industry. The second betrayal cut deep, the realization that my parents were perfectly willing to claim credit for my success in public while dismissing it in private. They hadn't changed. They had simply found a new way to use my achievements for their own social currency. After graduation, I moved permanently to San Francisco and threw myself into building my career. The tech industry in 2013 was still overwhelmingly male-dominated, but I found my niche in algorithm development and quickly gained a reputation for solving problems others couldn't crack. My communication with home dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional update email. By 27, I had changed companies twice, each move bringing greater responsibility and substantially higher compensation. I was now a senior engineer at Innovate Tech, leading a team developing machine learning applications. My salary had crossed into six figures, allowing me to finally pay off my student loans and build a comfortable life in the notoriously expensive Bay Area. It was around this time that my parents began showing renewed interest in my life. My mother's calls became more frequent, her questions increasingly focused on my financial situation. Have you considered buying property? Are you contributing to a retirement account? What kind of benefits does your company offer? The correlation between my increasing salary and their increasing attention wasn't lost on me. The parents who couldn't be bothered to help with college expenses now wanted financial advice and updates on my career trajectory. Their sudden interest felt less like reconciliation and more like opportunism. During one particularly transparent call, my father asked if I had investment opportunities to recommend. Your mother and I are thinking of diversifying our portfolio, he explained, despite the fact that he'd never previously mentioned having a portfolio to diversify. I'm not a financial advisor, Dad, I replied coolly, and my investments are pretty specific to the tech industry. Probably not right for your situation. Well, you could at least share what's working for you, he pressed. That's what family does, helps each other out. The irony of his invoking family obligation wasn't lost on me. Where was this sentiment when I was working 3 jobs to put myself through college? But I was building a successful life despite their absence, and that knowledge gave me the strength to maintain boundaries they had never respected. The Tech Innovate conference in 2018 changed my life in ways I never anticipated. I was presenting a paper on efficiency improvements in machine learning algorithms work that had earned significant attention in the industry when Michael Chen approached me after my session. Your optimization approach is brilliant, he said, extending his hand. I've been working on a similar problem, but your solution elegantly addresses issues I've been stuck on for months. Michael was a senior engineer at Rivaltech with an impressive background in AI development. Our conversation moved from technical discussions to personal backgrounds, discovering shared experiences as first-generation professionals who had charted paths different from family expectations. My parents wanted me to become a doctor, he confessed over coffee. They immigrated from Taiwan with specific ideas about success in America. Engineering was a compromise. At least I was getting a professional degree. At least yours compromised, I replied. Mine just withdrew support entirely. Our connection was immediate and multifaceted: intellectual peers, similar professional challenges, and the unique understanding of navigating cultural and family expectations. What began as professional networking evolved into dinner dates, weekend hikes, and long conversations about everything from algorithm design to favorite childhood books. Michael was brilliant but humble, ambitious but ethical, driven but balanced in a way I was still learning to be. Where I had developed sharp edges from years of proving myself, he had a centered calm that came from knowing his worth wasn't tied exclusively to his achievements. 3 months into dating, Michael invited me to his parents' home for a traditional Sunday dinner. I was terrified my experiences with family had left me with deep insecurities about parental approval. Wei and Mei Chen defied every expectation. They welcomed me with genuine warmth, asked thoughtful questions about my work and interests, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person rather than evaluating me as a potential daughter-in-law. Michael tells us you are brilliant with computers, Wei said, serving me a second helping of dumplings. He says your work is changing how machines learn. Dad, you don't need to embarrass her, Michael protested. Is it embarrassing to be proud of accomplishments? Wei asked, genuinely confused. In our home, we celebrate hard work and intelligence. After dinner, May showed me family photo albums, sharing stories of Michael's childhood with obvious affection. He was always taking things apart to see how they worked, she laughed, pointing to a photo of a disassembled radio. Sometimes he even put them back together correctly. The evening was a revelation. This was what family could be: supportive, proud, teasing but kind, interested without being intrusive. The contrast with my own family experience was stark and painful. As our relationship deepened, I found myself increasingly integrated into the Chen family. I was included in holiday celebrations, weekend dim sum, and family text chains filled with inside jokes and genuine updates. Michael's sister Lily became a close friend, and his grandparents insisted I call them Nai Nai and Ye Ye, like their other grandchildren. You're part of the family now, May told me, after I helped her prepare a traditional New Year feast. Family sticks together. The belonging I felt with the Chens made the contrast with my own family even more apparent. When Michael suggested we visit my parents in Chicago, I reluctantly agreed, hoping that perhaps seeing me in a stable, happy relationship might bridge some of the distance between us. The weekend was a disaster. My parents were polite but cold to Michael, peppering him with questions about his career trajectory and family background that felt more like an interrogation than genuine interest. My mother repeatedly made awkward comments about his ethnicity, asking tone-deaf questions about cultural differences and whether his parents spoke English. I grew up in San Diego, Michael replied patiently. My parents have lived in the U.S. for 40 years. My dad teaches engineering at UCSD. The third betrayal came during a brief moment alone with my mother in the kitchen. I had gone to help her with dessert while Michael and my father were discussing something in the living room. He seems nice enough, Natalie, she said, arranging cookies on a plate. But honestly, I always pictured you with someone more, like us. You could do better, you know. There's still time. The casual racism, coupled with the dismissal of the most wonderful person I'd ever met, ignited a fury I rarely allowed myself to express. Better than a brilliant, kind engineer who treats me with respect and whose family has shown me more love in 6 months than you have in my entire life? I kept my voice low but intense. There's no better than Michael. And if you can't see that, it's your loss. My mother's face hardened. I'm just looking out for your future. That's what mothers do. No, Mom, you're looking out for some imaginary ideal that has nothing to do with my happiness. That's what you've always done. The rest of the weekend passed in strained politeness. On the flight back to San Francisco, Michael held my hand and said simply, I understand now, and I'm sorry they can't see how amazing you are. Your parents more than make up for it, I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. After 3 years of building a life together, sharing an apartment in the Mission District, and growing both personally and professionally, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to Big Sur. The ring was his grandmother's, a gesture of acceptance that moved me to tears. When I called my parents with the news, their response was lukewarm at best. Well, I suppose congratulations are in order, my mother said. Have you set a date? We'll need to check our calendar. We're thinking next spring, I replied. We'd like to keep it relatively small. Small? Natalie, this is your wedding. We have friends and colleagues who will expect to be included. It's our wedding, Mom, not a networking event for your friends. The conversation deteriorated from there, with my mother making increasingly controlling suggestions about venues, guest lists, and traditions that held no meaning for Michael and me. My father eventually took the phone. Your mother is just excited, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Of course we'll be there, whatever you decide to do. Despite the tension, I sent formal invitations with a personal note expressing my hope that we could move forward as a family. Their RSVP card returned with a checkmark next to "will attend" and no personal message. As the wedding approached, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this milestone might begin a new chapter in our relationship. That hope sustained me through the planning process, even as their input and interest remained minimal compared to the enthusiastic involvement of the Chen family. I reserved front row seats for them, included them in the printed program, and even incorporated a few traditional elements my mother had mentioned wanting to see. Perhaps, I thought, this gesture of inclusion might finally bridge the gap between us. I was wrong. April 17th dawned clear and perfect in the Sonoma Valley. The small winery we had chosen was decorated with spring flowers and twinkling lights, and everything was proceeding according to plan. As I prepared with my bridesmaids, close friends from work, and Michael's sister Lily, I kept glancing at my phone. No messages from my parents. They're probably just running late, Lily said kindly, noticing my anxiety. Traffic from San Francisco can be unpredictable. I nodded, not wanting to voice my growing suspicion that they weren't coming at all. I had spoken briefly with my mother the previous day, confirming details about their hotel and arrival time. Everything had seemed fine, if somewhat distant. 2 hours before the ceremony, as I was having my hair styled, my phone finally rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Mom? Where are you? Are you on your way?" "Oh, Natalie," she sighed, her voice dripping with practiced regret. "I'm so sorry, but we're not going to make it after all. Your father woke up with terrible back pain, and the doctor advises against travel. We thought about coming separately, but you know how these things go." Her voice trailed off, the excuse paper-thin. My father's back pain hadn't prevented them from attending a neighbor's anniversary party the previous weekend, an event I knew about only because Ryan had mentioned it in a text. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the crushing weight in my chest. "I hope Dad feels better soon." "We'll make it up to you," she promised vaguely. "Perhaps a nice dinner when you visit Chicago next." There was no apology for the last-minute cancellation, no acknowledgement of what their absence would mean on my wedding day, just a flimsy excuse and a casual suggestion that it could be remedied with dinner. I ended the call and sat in silence, the hairstylist tactfully pretending to adjust something while giving me a moment to compose myself. Lily, who had overheard, squeezed my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Natalie." "It's fine," I said automatically, years of conditioning kicking in. "It's not unexpected." But it wasn't fine. It was the fourth and most devastating betrayal, the culmination of a lifetime of conditional love and misplaced priorities. The two people who should have been most invested in my happiness couldn't be bothered to attend the most significant day of my life, without even the courtesy of a believable excuse. When it came time for the ceremony, Michael's father, Wei, approached me in the bride's room. "Natalie," he said gently, "Michael told me about your parents. I would be honored to walk you down the aisle, if you would allow me." His kindness broke through the numbness I had wrapped around myself. "I would love that, Wei. Thank you." "In our family," he said, offering his arm, "we show up for each other. Always. Today and all days, you are our daughter too." Walking down the aisle on Wei's arm, seeing Michael's face light up as our eyes met, I made a decision. I would not allow my parents' absence to overshadow this perfect day. I would not give them that power. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity and sincerity. May read a traditional Chinese poem about partnership and growth. My friend Layla shared a passage about chosen family. Michael and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams and to create a home built on mutual respect and unwavering support. 2 chairs in the front row remained conspicuously empty throughout the ceremony and reception. A few guests asked politely about my parents, and I provided the simple explanation that they were unable to attend. The Chen family smoothly filled the traditional roles, giving toasts, participating in ceremonial moments, welcoming guests with warmth that made the absence of my own family less noticeable to everyone except me. The wedding photos later showed a radiant bride surrounded by loving in-laws and friends, but I couldn't help noticing the empty space where my family should have been. It was a visual representation of the void they had created through years of conditional love and ultimate abandonment. Our honeymoon in New Zealand was a welcome distraction, 2 weeks of adventure and connection in a breathtakingly beautiful setting. Michael never pressed me to discuss my feelings about my parents' absence, but he held me through the nights when grief would unexpectedly surface. Upon our return to San Francisco, I checked my mail, hoping for perhaps a card or gift from my parents, some acknowledgement of the event they had missed. There was nothing. No call, no text, not even a perfunctory congratulations. It was then that I made the painful but necessary decision to step back completely from the relationship. Not out of anger or revenge, but out of self-preservation. I had spent my entire life seeking approval from people fundamentally incapable of providing it unconditionally. The energy I had expended trying to earn their love could now be redirected toward nurturing relationships that added value to my life, rather than depleting it. With Michael's support, I began seeing Dr. Sarah Goldman, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions helped me process not just the wedding absence, but the lifetime of conditional love that had preceded it. What your parents did was a profound rejection, Dr. Goldman acknowledged during one particularly difficult session. But their rejection speaks to their limitations, not your worth. I know that intellectually, I admitted. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. Of course they are. You've spent a lifetime trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. Over the following months, I worked to internalize the understanding that my parents' behavior reflected their own issues: status anxiety, rigid definitions of success, inability to adapt to a child who didn't conform to their expectations. Their absence at my wedding was simply the clearest expression of a dynamic that had existed throughout my life. Slowly, I began to accept that some relationships cannot be saved, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. Some wounds won't heal with time and effort because the injuring behavior never truly stops. In those cases, the healthiest choice is sometimes to acknowledge the reality and adjust your expectations accordingly. My wedding day, both beautiful and painful, became the dividing line between my past spent seeking validation I would never receive and my future built on relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. The empty chairs in the front row served as a final, irrefutable evidence that I needed to move forward without looking back. The year following our wedding was transformative professionally. Perhaps freed from the emotional drain of seeking parental approval, I found myself working with unprecedented clarity and creativity. The algorithm I had been developing for optimizing machine learning processes was showing remarkable results in early testing. This could change how the entire industry approaches AI efficiency, my director commented during a review meeting. Have you considered patenting the approach? With the company's legal support, I filed for a patent and continued refining the algorithm. Meanwhile, Michael and I had begun discussing the possibility of launching our own startup focused on practical AI applications for small to medium businesses, a market segment largely ignored by the tech giants. We could build something meaningful together, Michael said one evening as we discussed the idea over dinner. Something that reflects our values and vision, not just another Silicon Valley cash grab. The idea was exhilarating but terrifying. Leaving the security of established companies to strike out on our own would mean significant risk and likely some lean early years. But we both had savings, valuable skills, and a shared vision of technology that served human needs rather than exploiting them. 6 months into development of my algorithm, everything changed. Google's AI division expressed interest in the patent, initiating discussions about potential acquisition. After intense negotiations supported by a technology rights attorney, they offered 7 figures for exclusive rights to the technology. The amount was life-changing enough to fund our startup comfortably and still have substantial savings. Michael and I celebrated with champagne on our apartment rooftop, watching the sunset over the city that had become our home. To Natalie Reynolds Chen, Michael toasted, the most brilliant algorithm designer in Silicon Valley. And to Reynolds Chen Innovation, I added, using the working name for our planned company. May we build something that matters. With the financial security from the patent sale, we incorporated our company and leased a small office space in Oakland. We hired 3 talented engineers who shared our vision and began developing our first product, an AI system that would help small businesses automate routine tasks without requiring enterprise-level resources. 6 months into our startup journey, Tech Forward magazine ran a feature article about innovative female founders in AI, with me as the lead profile. The article detailed my algorithm breakthrough, the patent acquisition, and our new company's mission. Reynolds Chen Innovation represents a new generation of tech companies, the article concluded. Founded on principles of accessibility and ethical AI development, and led by one of the industry's most brilliant minds, it stands poised to bring the benefits of artificial intelligence to segments of the economy previously left behind by the tech revolution. The morning after the article was published online, I received a text from my mother for the first time in nearly a year. Saw the article about your company. Very impressive. Your father and I are proud. We should catch up soon. The message was so predictable, it was almost comical. Complete silence through months of building a life and business, then sudden interest the moment public recognition occurred. It was the same pattern that had played out repeatedly throughout my life, attention contingent on achievements they could brag about to friends. I showed the text to Michael, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He knew me well enough to understand I would process this in my own way and time. After careful consideration, I sent a brief, polite response. Thank you. Life is quite busy with the new company, but I appreciate the good wishes. It was neither a rejection nor an invitation, simply an acknowledgement that maintained the boundaries I had established for my own well-being. Over the next 2 months, my parents made several attempts to re-establish contact. My mother sent occasional texts asking about the business or commenting on tech news that mentioned our industry. My father left a voicemail about reconnecting now that things have settled down. There was never an apology for missing the wedding or recognition of how their actions had affected me, just an apparent desire to pick up as if nothing significant had happened. I responded minimally, never initiating contact but not ignoring them completely. Dr. Goldman had helped me develop this approach as a middle ground between cutting them off entirely and falling back into old, destructive patterns. You can acknowledge their existence without giving them emotional access to your life, she had explained. It's not all or nothing. You get to define the terms of any relationship you choose to maintain. As Reynolds Chen Innovation grew, we expanded to a larger office and hired additional staff. Our first product launched to positive reviews and strong early adoption. A profile of successful tech startups in the San Francisco Chronicle included a group photo of our team and mentioned the unique founding story. The 5th betrayal came when Ryan called to congratulate me on the Chronicle piece. "It's really cool what you're doing, Nat," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "Though I have to say, Mom's version of your success story is creative." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "She's been telling everyone that they funded your education and initial business venture, that they've been supporting your dreams all along." She showed the article to her whole garden club and took credit for raising such an entrepreneurial daughter. The rewriting of history was so audacious, it left me momentarily speechless. The parents who had withdrawn financial support when I chose the wrong college, who had been absent for every significant milestone, including my wedding, were now claiming credit for my success. "That's quite a revision of reality," I finally said. "Yeah, well, you know, Mom," Ryan replied uncomfortably. "Everything gets filtered through her preferred narrative." After that conversation, I made a decision. If my parents wanted to claim ownership of my success, let them. Their false narratives couldn't diminish what I had actually accomplished or change the reality of our relationship. I had built my life without their support, and I would continue to do so without their approval. As the company flourished, Michael and I decided to buy a home in Oakland, a beautiful craftsman, with a view of the bay and enough room for a home office, and eventually, we hoped, children. The process of creating our own family space, designed around our values and preferences, was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. On a whim, after the house purchase was complete, I did something completely out of character. I bought a car, not just any car, but a sleek, midnight blue Porsche 911 worth $135,000. It was an indulgence that served no practical purpose in a city with notorious parking problems and excellent public transportation. "This isn't like you," Michael observed when I drove it home. "Not that I'm judging, it's your money too. I'm just surprised." I ran my hand over the smooth leather steering wheel. "I know. It's ridiculous and impractical and completely wonderful. But why a Porsche specifically?" I thought about it for a moment. Maybe because it's the ultimate symbol of success in my parents' world, the kind of thing they would instantly respect and envy. I laughed, somewhat embarrassed by the admission. "That sounds petty, doesn't it?" Michael shook his head. "It sounds human. And if owning this car gives you some sense of, I don't know, closure or victory or whatever you need, then it's worth every penny." But as the novelty wore off, I began to question my own motivations. Had I really spent a small fortune on a car to impress people whose opinions I claimed no longer mattered? Was I still, despite everything, seeking validation from the same sources that had consistently withheld it? The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to prove I didn't need their approval, I had made a purchase specifically designed to earn it. The contradiction revealed how deeply ingrained those patterns remained, despite all my progress. During my next therapy session, Dr. Goldman helped me process these feelings. "Healing isn't linear," she reminded me. "Old patterns resurface, especially around symbols of success and validation. The important thing is that you're recognizing it now." So what do I do with this ridiculously expensive car that I bought for all the wrong reasons? What do you want to do with it? The question stayed with me for weeks, eventually crystallizing into a plan that would bring me face to face with the source of these conflicted feelings. It was time to drive my Porsche to Chicago and finally confront the family dynamics that had shaped so much of my life. The business trip to Chicago came at a perfect time. Reynolds Chen Innovation was exploring a partnership with a manufacturing technology firm based in the Midwest, providing a legitimate professional reason for the journey I had been contemplating. "I could go instead," Michael offered, recognizing the emotional complexity the trip represented. "Or we could both go." I shook my head. "This is something I need to do myself. Besides, someone needs to keep the company running." The decision to drive rather than fly was impractical but symbolic. The Porsche, with its sleek lines and unmistakable engine rumble, would be the perfect prop for the confrontation I had been rehearsing in my mind. Before finalizing my plans, I discussed the approach with Dr. Goldman, wanting to ensure my motivations were reasonably healthy and my expectations realistic. "I'm not going there expecting some dramatic reconciliation or even an apology," I explained. "I just want them to see me, really see me on my own terms, without the filter of their expectations or disappointments." "And you think the car will help with that?" "The car is just a shortcut, a visual representation of success they can't dismiss or reinterpret. It's shallow, I know, but it speaks their language in a way my actual accomplishments never seemed to." Dr. Goldman nodded thoughtfully. "Just remember that whatever validation you're seeking, whether you admit it or not, may not come. Can you handle that disappointment if they still don't respond the way you hope?" It was a fair question, and one I considered carefully before answering. I think I'm past the point of being devastated by their reactions. This is more about closure than approval now. The 3-day drive from Oakland to Chicago gave me ample time to process my thoughts and prepare emotionally for the encounter. As I crossed the Nevada desert, traversed the Rockies, and drove through the Midwestern plains, I found myself mentally reviewing key moments in my relationship with my parents: the conditional praise, the withdrawn support, the absence at my wedding. the attempted reconnection once success arrived. By the time I reached the outskirts of Chicago, I felt centered and clear about my objectives. This visit wasn't about winning their love or approval, it was about facing the reality of our relationship without illusion or expectation, and then moving forward, unburdened by false hope. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood seemed simultaneously unchanged and completely different, like returning to a movie set of a place you once lived. The modest ranch houses, neat lawns, and familiar landmarks remained, but my perception of them had been transformed by time and distance. Mrs. Abernathy still tended her front garden. The Johnsons' basketball hoop still hung above their garage door. The stop sign at the corner of Maple and Elm still leaned slightly to the left. But the neighborhood that had once defined my entire world now seemed small and confined, a place I had outgrown in every possible way. As I turned onto my parents' street, the Porsche's engine drawing curious glances from neighbors walking dogs or retrieving mail, I felt a strange calm replace the anxiety I had anticipated. Whatever happened next, I was no longer the desperate child seeking approval or the wounded adult nursing old hurts. I was simply Natalie, successful, loved, and complete with or without their recognition. I parked in the driveway of my childhood home, the sleek sports car looking almost comically out of place against the backdrop of suburban modesty. Before I could even turn off the engine, I saw the curtain in the front window move. A moment later, the front door opened, and my parents emerged, their expressions a study in conflicting emotions, surprise, confusion, and unmistakable interest in the expensive vehicle now sitting in their driveway. My father reached me first, his eyes fixed on the car rather than on me. "Natalie, what a surprise!" he exclaimed, running his hand along the Porsche's fender. "This is quite a machine. New purchase?" My mother hung back slightly, smoothing her hair and straightening her cardigan as if she'd been caught unprepared by important company. "We had no idea you were coming to town. You should have called ahead." No hug. "No, we've missed you, or it's good to see you." Just concern about being caught unprepared and fascination with the car. It was exactly as I had expected, yet somehow still disappointing. "I'm in Chicago for business," I explained, climbing out of the car. "Thought I'd stop by since I was in town." "Business must be good," my father commented, still admiring the Porsche. "These don't come cheap." "The company is doing well," I confirmed, deliberately vague. "How have you both been?" "Oh, you know, the usual," my mother replied, her eyes darting between me and the car. "Would you like to come in? I can put on some coffee. We'd love to hear all about your business." The emphasis on the last word made it clear that what they really wanted to hear about was my financial situation. The Porsche had accomplished exactly what I had intended. It had transformed me in their eyes from the disappointing daughter who had chosen the wrong career path to someone worth listening to. As I followed them inside, I noticed my mother glancing up and down the street, clearly hoping the neighbors had noticed the expensive car in their driveway and the successful daughter who came with it. The realization was both vindicating and profoundly sad. The house was largely unchanged, the same furniture, same color scheme, same family photos on the wall, though I noticed my wedding photo was conspicuously absent from the display. The familiar scent of my mother's potpourri and furniture polish brought back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. "So," my father said as we settled in the living room, "tell us about this car of yours. What made you decide on a Porsche?" It was the perfect opening to the conversation I had come to have. The question wasn't really about the car, it was about the success it represented and how I had achieved it without their guidance or approval. The car was simply a tangible symbol of the journey that had brought me back to this house as a visitor rather than a daughter seeking validation. Looking around at the carefully maintained shrine to suburban respectability, I realized with perfect clarity that I had been seeking closure from people who had never acknowledged causing harm in the first place. The gap between their perception of our relationship and the reality of it was simply too vast to bridge with a single conversation, no matter how carefully planned. But I could at least speak my truth, whether or not they were capable of hearing it. "The car isn't really what I came to talk about," I said, declining the offered coffee with a small shake of my head. "I think we have more important things to discuss." My mother's smile tightened. "Of course, dear. Though you must admit it's quite an attention-getter. The Petersons across the street were just looking out their window." "That's actually relevant to why I'm here," I continued, maintaining a calm I had practiced during countless mental rehearsals of this conversation. "The fact that you're more interested in my car and what the neighbors think of it than in my actual life." My father's expression shifted from admiring to defensive. "Now, that's not fair, Natalie. Of course we care about your life. We're your parents." "Are you?" "Because parents typically attend their daughter's wedding. They typically call on birthdays. They typically know basic facts about their child's life." The direct confrontation created an immediate tension in the room. My mother's face flushed, and she adjusted a pillow unnecessarily. "We explained about the wedding. Your father's back was fine the weekend before when you attended the Miller's anniversary party," I finished for her. "Ryan mentioned it." My father stepped in, his tone taking on the authoritative quality I remembered from childhood disputes. "Listen, Natalie, if you've come here just to rehash old grievances—" "They're not old grievances when they're ongoing patterns," I interrupted, surprising myself with my willingness to challenge him directly. "And I didn't come to rehash anything. I came to establish clarity." At that moment, the front door opened, and Ryan walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Natalie, no one told me you were visiting." He crossed the room and gave me a genuine hug, the first physical affection I'd received since arriving. "It was an impromptu visit," I explained, returning his embrace. "Good to see you, Ryan. Is that your Porsche outside? It's incredible." My mother immediately brightened, apparently relieved by the interruption and the return to safer conversational territory. "Isn't it impressive?" Natalie was just about to tell us about her business. "It must be doing very well." The transparent pivot back to my financial success, rather than the emotional issues I had raised, was so predictable it was almost comical. Ryan shot me a knowing look, seemingly more aware of the dynamics at play than I had given him credit for. Before I could redirect the conversation, the doorbell rang. My mother hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Linda Peterson from across the street. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Linda said with a smile that indicated she didn't care if she was. "I just saw the beautiful car and realized it must be Natalie visiting. It's been years." "Linda, yes, our successful daughter is just in town briefly for business," my mother gushed, slipping effortlessly into the role of proud parent. "She and her husband have started their own technology company in California. They're doing wonderfully." The performance was flawless, the loving mother celebrating her daughter's achievements as if she had been an enthusiastic supporter all along. It was exactly what I had expected, and precisely why I had brought the Porsche as a prop. The car had instantly transformed me from the disappointing daughter who had chosen the wrong path to the successful entrepreneur worth claiming. Within 15 minutes, 2 more neighbors had dropped by, each making a beeline for the window to admire the Porsche while my mother served impromptu refreshments and spoke about my company as if she had been intimately involved in its creation. "We always knew Natalie would do something extraordinary," she told Mrs. Kaminsky, the retired schoolteacher from down the street. "She was always so determined." Ryan caught my eye from across the room and raised an eyebrow, silently acknowledging the absurdity of the situation. I gave him a small nod of appreciation for the moment of genuine connection amid the performance unfolding around us. When the neighbors finally departed, my father turned to me with an entrepreneur-to-entrepreneur expression that felt entirely new. "So, about your company, are you considering investors? I've made some connections through the golf club that might be interested." "We're fully funded," I replied coolly. "But thank you for the offer." "Well, you should always keep options open," he continued, apparently oblivious to my tone. "I could introduce you to Bob Whitman. He's in venture capital now. Very well connected." My mother joined in eagerly. "And you must let us know when you're ready to purchase a house. The real estate market in California is so complicated we've been reading up on it. We could help you navigate." Michael and I already bought a house in Oakland. Last year. Oh! My mother looked genuinely surprised. You didn't mention that. There's a lot I don't mention, I said quietly. Because you don't ask. Because you weren't there. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the brief facade of normal family dynamics dissolving under the weight of unspoken resentments. My father's expression hardened. If this is about the wedding again, it's about everything, I interrupted. The wedding was just the culmination, the most obvious example of a lifetime pattern. I reached into my bag and removed a carefully protected photograph, one of the wedding pictures, showing the empty seats in the front row where my parents should have been. I placed it on the coffee table between us. These were your seats, I said simply, reserved for parents who couldn't be bothered to show up for the most important day of their daughter's life. My mother looked away, uncomfortable with the visual evidence of their absence. We explained. You made excuses, I corrected. Just like you're making excuses now. Just like you've always made excuses for prioritizing appearances over actual relationship. My father's face flushed with anger. That's enough, Natalie. We didn't raise you to speak to us this way. You didn't raise me to be successful either. You raised me to fulfill your specific vision of success, which I rejected. And yet here I am, successful, despite rather than because of your influence. The sixth betrayal came in my father's response, a reflexive defense mechanism so transparent it was almost pitiful. We gave you every advantage, he insisted. The best schools, enrichment activities, connections, everything we did was to set you up for success. And when I chose a path you didn't approve of, you withdrew all support. You held love and approval hostage to compliance with your plans. That's not parenting, that's controlling. My phone rang, mercifully interrupting the escalating tension. It was Michael, checking in as we had arranged. Everything okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Yes, I replied, stepping away from my parents for a moment of privacy. About as expected. I'll call you back in a bit. I'm here if you need me, he said simply, understanding the complexity of what I was facing without needing elaboration. The contrast between that brief exchange, the uncomplicated support and concern in Michael's voice, and the strained, conditional interaction with my parents was stark and illuminating. In less than 30 seconds, Michael had demonstrated more genuine care than my parents had shown in our entire interaction. When I turned back to the living room, I found my father had stepped out, and my mother was busying herself straightening items that didn't need straightening, her typical response to emotional discomfort. I should probably go, I said, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the encounter. I have a business dinner tonight. My mother looked up, relief evident in her expression. Of course, dear. It was good to see you. Will you be in town long? Just until tomorrow. The meeting's in the morning. Then I'm driving back. So soon? Well, drive safely in that beautiful car. And, she hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. Thank you for stopping by. No acknowledgement of the wedding absence. No recognition of the pain they had caused. Not even a superficial apology for appearance's sake. Just thank you for stopping by, as if I had dropped off a casserole or borrowed a cup of sugar. As I collected my things, Ryan followed me to the door. Can we talk before you leave town? He asked quietly. Maybe breakfast tomorrow? The request surprised me, but his expression seemed genuinely earnest. Sure. Text me where and when. As I walked to my car, I felt oddly light despite the unsatisfying resolution or lack thereof with my parents. I had said my truth plainly, without expectation of understanding or change. The confrontation hadn't provided the catharsis I might have secretly hoped for, but it had confirmed what I already knew. My parents were fundamentally incapable of the kind of relationship I deserved. That clarity, painful as it was, felt like freedom. Back at my hotel, I ordered room service and called Michael to debrief about the encounter. His calm, supportive presence on the other end of the line centered me as I processed the emotions of the afternoon. They were exactly as expected, I concluded, after recounting the details, completely focused on the car, the company, the external markers of success. No interest in me as a person, no acknowledgement of their absence at the wedding, no real connection at all. I'm sorry, Michael said simply, not surprised, but sorry nonetheless. The strangest part was Ryan asking to meet for breakfast tomorrow. We've never been close, he was always the golden child, and I was the disappointment. I can't imagine what he wants to discuss. Maybe seeing you stand up to them affected him in some way, Michael suggested. People can surprise you. The next morning, I met Ryan at a small cafe downtown, far from our parents' neighborhood. He was already seated when I arrived, fidgeting nervously with a sugar packet. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Honestly, I wasn't sure either, I admitted, but I'm curious what you wanted to talk about. After ordering coffee, Ryan took a deep breath. First, I want to apologize for the wedding, for not being there, Mom and Dad. They forbade me from attending. Forbade you? I repeated, genuinely surprised. You're an adult, Ryan. He looked down, clearly embarrassed. I know. But there's more to the story than you know. About them, about me, about why they are the way they are. Over the next hour, Ryan revealed aspects of our family dynamics I had never fully understood. Our parents, it turned out, were not nearly as financially secure as they pretended to be. Years of living beyond their means to maintain appearances had left them over-leveraged and vulnerable. Dad's business has been struggling for years, Ryan explained. And they remortgaged the house twice, once to cover his losses during the recession, and again to fund my first business attempt. Your business? I didn't know you had started a business. Ryan laughed humorlessly. It failed spectacularly. Lost everything they invested, nearly $200,000. That's why they didn't come to your wedding. They couldn't afford the trip without admitting they were in financial trouble, and they'd rather have you think they didn't care than admit they couldn't maintain the facade. The revelation was stunning. All these years, I had assumed their absence was due to disapproval or indifference, when it may have been at least partially driven by pride and financial strain. Why didn't they just tell me? I would have understood financial difficulties. I might even have helped. You know, Mom and Dad, Ryan said with a sad smile. Appearances are everything. And after how they treated you when you chose UIUC over Princeton, I think they were ashamed to admit they needed help from the daughter they had dismissed. As we continued talking, Ryan shared his own journey of recognizing the toxic patterns in our family. Being the favorite child wasn't the advantage I once thought it was, he admitted. They projected all their aspirations onto me, and when I failed, the disappointment was crushing. I've been in therapy for the past year, trying to untangle my self-worth from their approval. That's actually really impressive, Ryan, I said, genuinely moved by his self-awareness. It took me years and significant distance to see those patterns clearly. I've been watching you from afar, he confessed, seeing how you built your life on your own terms, how you found success doing what you love rather than what someone else expected. It made me question everything about the path I was on. For the first time in our adult lives, Ryan and I connected as equals two people, processing the complex legacy of our upbringing and finding our own ways forward. There was no competition, no resentment, just mutual understanding and tentative hope for a relationship independent of our parents' influence. Would you consider staying in touch? Ryan asked as we prepared to leave. Not through Mom and Dad, but directly? I'd like to know my sister. The simple sincerity of the request touched me deeply. I'd like that too. As we parted ways, Ryan hesitated, then added, About the Porsche, it's a beautiful car. But you know what impressed me most about seeing you yesterday? It wasn't the car or the company or any of that. It was how completely yourself you seemed, how comfortable in your own skin. That's what success looks like to me now. His words stayed with me as I drove to my business meeting. The Porsche, that had seemed so important just yesterday, now feeling somewhat ridiculous. I had purchased it partially as a prop, in a confrontation that ultimately confirmed what I already knew, that my parents' validation was based on external markers of success rather than genuine connection. But the car had served another purpose I hadn't anticipated. It had created the opportunity for an honest conversation with Ryan, potentially the beginning of a real relationship with the one family member who seemed capable of growth and self-reflection. The business meeting went smoothly, the partnership agreement progressing toward finalization. As I prepared for the long drive back to California, I realized that this trip to Chicago had provided more clarity than I had anticipated, though not in the ways I had expected. My parents were unlikely to ever become the supportive, emotionally available people I had longed for throughout my childhood. That was a reality I needed to accept fully, rather than continuing to test through periodic attempts at reconnection. But Ryan's unexpected openness suggested that family connections could sometimes evolve and heal, given honesty and mutual effort. It wasn't the clean, complete resolution I might have scripted, but it was real messy, complicated, and cautiously hopeful. As I drove west, leaving Chicago behind both physically and metaphorically, I felt a growing certainty that the true measure of success had nothing to do with Porsches or patents or prestigious addresses. It was about building a life aligned with your values, surrounded by people who supported your authentic self rather than some performative version designed to earn conditional approval. By that measure, I was already more successful than my parents could comprehend. The drive back to California provided ample time for reflection. The vast American landscape passing outside my windows from the industrial Midwest through the plains of Nebraska, the majestic Rockies, the Nevada desert, and finally, the familiar California coastline mirrored my internal journey from constraint to expansion, from seeking external validation to finding internal peace. When I finally arrived home, Michael was waiting with dinner prepared and a quiet understanding of what I needed after the emotional marathon of the past week. We sat on our back deck overlooking the Oakland Hills, sharing wine and conversation as the sun set. "I've been thinking about the Porsche," I said after recounting the revelations from Ryan. "I think I bought it for all the wrong reasons." Michael nodded without judgment. "What do you want to do with it?" "I'm not sure yet, but I know it represents something I'm trying to move beyond the need to prove my worth through external symbols." The next morning, over breakfast, Michael and I had a deeper conversation about family, boundaries, and values. The kind of honest exchange that had been impossible in my family of origin but came naturally with him. "Meeting your parents again made me realize how lucky I am to have mine," he said thoughtfully. "Not because they're perfect, they're definitely not, but because they've always seen me as a person, not a projection of their own aspirations." "I wish I could have had that," I admitted. "But I'm starting to accept that wishing won't make it so. They are who they are. The question is who I choose to be in relation to them going forward." Over the following weeks, that question guided my decisions as I established clearer boundaries with my parents. After careful consideration and several sessions with Dr. Goldman, I composed a letter that was neither accusatory nor conciliatory, but simply truthful about my experience and my needs. "I value honesty and genuine connection," I wrote toward the end. "If we are to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on those principles rather than appearances or achievements. I don't expect you to change fundamentally at this stage of your lives, but I need you to understand that my participation in this relationship will be contingent on mutual respect and acknowledgement of reality rather than performance." Their response, when it came 2 weeks later, was predictably mixed. My mother wrote a lengthy email that alternated between defensive justifications, "We always wanted what was best for you," and superficial apologies. "If you felt unsupported, that was never our intention." My father added a brief postscript about being willing to move forward, but made no acknowledgement of specific harms or responsibility. It wasn't the response I might have hoped for in my most optimistic moments, but it was honest in its way, an accurate reflection of their limitations and perspective. I could accept that reality without endorsing it or allowing it to define my self-worth. Meanwhile, Ryan and I continued to build a cautious but genuine connection. We set up regular video calls and found common ground in our shared experiences and evolving understanding of family dynamics. He was making changes in his life too, leaving the business field our father had pushed him toward and exploring opportunities in environmental science, his original passion. "I keep expecting to feel guilty about disappointing Dad," he confessed during one of our calls. "But mostly I feel relieved, like I can finally breathe." "I know exactly what you mean," I replied, feeling a newfound kinship with the brother who had once seemed so distant. As for the Porsche, I made a decision that felt both practical and symbolic. I sold it and used part of the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for women in computer science from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, an opportunity to help others avoid the financial struggles I had faced when pursuing my own education without family support. The remaining funds went toward expanding our company's mentorship program, creating paid internships, specifically targeting students who lacked the family connections and resources that typically serve as entry points to the tech industry. These initiatives felt like a way of transforming what had begun as a symbol of status seeking into something aligned with my actual values, creating opportunity, recognizing merit regardless of background, and building structures of support I had lacked in my own journey. 1 year after the confrontation in Chicago, Michael and I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner in our Oakland home. Around our table sat a chosen family of friends, colleagues, and a few biological relatives, including Ryan, who had flown in from Chicago, and Michael's parents, who brought enough food for an army despite our assurances that we had the meal covered. As I looked around at these people who loved authentically and supported genuinely, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The pain of parental rejection had never fully disappeared, but it had been transformed into something constructive, a heightened appreciation for sincere connection, a commitment to breaking toxic cycles, and a deeper understanding of what constitutes true success. My parents had declined our invitation, citing prior commitments, which felt like its own form of honesty. Perhaps someday they would be ready for a relationship based on reality rather than performance, but I was no longer putting my life on hold waiting for that transformation. Instead, I was building the family I chose, one based on mutual respect, genuine interest, and unconditional support rather than status or obligation. In that chosen family, I had found a belonging deeper and more satisfying than anything I had experienced in my family of origin. The Porsche was gone, but in its place was something far more valuable, a life aligned with my values, relationships based on authenticity, and the freedom that comes from no longer seeking approval from those fundamentally incapable of providing it unconditionally. As we raised glasses in a toast to found family and new beginnings, I silently acknowledged how far I had come from the child desperate for parental approval and the adult who had once bought a luxury car to impress people who had never really seen me. True success, I had learned, wasn't measured in dollar signs or status symbols. It was found in the courage to live authentically, to love genuinely, and to create the life and family you need rather than remaining trapped in the one you were given. What about you? Have you ever felt like your worth to someone depended on your achievements or possessions? Have you found the courage to create boundaries with family members who only value you conditionally? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share with someone who might need these words. Thank you for listening. And remember, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who truly sees and values you for exactly who you are.